Beijing? Even though no missiles have actually fallen on Beijing, no drones, no offensive, but it's on a major attack. While bombs fall on Tehran, the shockwave may be hitting Beijing, because China's energy lifeline runs through a Persian Gulf that's now on fire. And when discounted Iranian crude becomes a liability overnight, Beijing discovers a vulnerability it can't airstrike away. While bombs fall on Tehran, the real damage might be landing somewhere else entirely. Beijing. Not a single missile has touched Chinese soil. Not one drone. Not one airstrike. But what's happening inside China right now, in the refining terminals of Shandong province, in the shipping ledgers of state-owned oil traders, in the emergency rooms of the Ministry of Commerce, is a slow-motion collision with a reality Beijing spent years pretending didn't exist. China is 70% dependent on imported oil and gas, the highest energy import dependency of any major power on Earth, and the majority of that volume transits through the Persian Gulf. The same Persian Gulf that is currently on fire. Here's what Iran meant to China, and why losing it hurts more than Beijing will admit publicly. Iran sold China something no one else could: cheap crude. 10 to 15% of China's total oil imports, at a discount of up to 20% below market price. Sold outside Western financial channels. No dollar transactions, no SWIFT exposure, no sanctions risk, at least on paper. The buyers weren't the big state refineries. They were the teapot refineries, small, independent, privately owned operations clustered in Shandong province, hundreds of them, running on razor-thin margins, employing hundreds of thousands of workers, entirely dependent on that Iranian discount to stay alive. Operation Epic Fury didn't just hit Tehran, it hit Shandong. That pipeline of cheap oil is gone, and there is no substitute at the same price, on the same terms, with the same political invisibility. Henry Wang, president of the Center for China and Globalization, said it plainly: "This is an artificial crisis, and it's going to hurt China." Now, zoom out, because this isn't just about barrels and pricing spreads. Brent crude jumped from $70 to over $80 a barrel in days. Analysts are projecting 100+ if the Strait of Hormuz closes for any sustained period. Maritime insurance costs for Gulf routes have exploded. Freight and logistics costs up across the entire supply chain. The Shanghai Stock Exchange dropped in line with global markets. And China can't fix any of it. Not diplomatically, not militarily, not economically, at least not fast enough to matter. Beijing's response has been, and this is the important part, loud in rhetoric, silent in action. Foreign Minister Wang Yi called the strikes unacceptable. China and Russia jointly demanded an emergency session of the UN Security Council. Wang Yi called Lavrov to coordinate positions, and then nothing. No military aid to Iran, no threat to Washington, no activation of the 25-year Comprehensive Cooperation Agreement that China signed with Tehran in 2021, the one that was supposed to be a strategic partnership covering energy, infrastructure, and security cooperation. When the partner got hit, China sent a diplomatic note. That's it. And there's a reason for that restraint. And it has nothing to do with principle. Any aggressive Chinese move triggers exactly the risks Beijing fears most: secondary sanctions on Chinese companies and banks, exclusion from Western payment systems, and the collapse of something Beijing wants badly: Trump's upcoming state visit to China. The math is simple. Iran is valuable, but it's not valuable enough to risk a direct confrontation with the United States. Not over oil. Not now. So China does what China always does in crises it can't control. It waits. Accelerate purchases of Russian and Saudi crude to offset the Iranian gap. at full market price, tap strategic petroleum reserves to cushion the short-term shock, maintain the neutrality posture, protect financial assets from sanctions exposure, and quietly begin dismantling the elaborate sanctions evasion architecture that Chinese traders and intermediaries spent years building around Iranian oil. Because that architecture is now a liability, Washington, in full wartime mode against Iran, has every political incentive to crack down on anyone still moving Iranian crude. The traders, the shell companies, the banks in the gray zone, they're pulling out, not because of principle, but because the risk calculus just flipped. But here's where it gets strategic in a way that goes beyond this war. China is evacuating 3,000 citizens from Iran. That's not routine consular operations. That's a signal that Beijing doesn't expect stability anytime soon. And every country watching, in Africa, Central Asia, Latin America, Southeast Asia, every nation that has signed a strategic partnership with China is now asking a very simple question. What does a Chinese partnership actually mean when it's tested? Because Iran had the agreement, Iran had the investments, Iran had the 25-year framework. And when American jets entered Iranian airspace, China's response was a phone call and a press statement. That's a credibility cost, not one that shows up in oil prices or stock tickers, but one that erodes something harder to rebuild. The belief that partnering with Beijing comes with a security floor. There's one scenario that changes all of this. If the Strait of Hormuz closes for weeks, not days, weeks, China runs out of alternatives that don't require American permission. Russian pipelines can't replace Gulf volumes. Overland routes can't handle the throughput. And every tanker rerouted around Africa adds cost, time, and insurance premiums that compound across the entire Chinese industrial base. That is the nightmare scenario for Xi Jinping. Not a military confrontation, not a trade war, but the quiet realization that China's entire energy security, its factories, its cities, its economic engine, still flows through a choke point that the United States Navy controls. Xi spent a decade trying to eliminate that dependency. Belt and Road, Russian energy deals, pipeline diplomacy across Central Asia, and in one weekend, one operation, the dependency was exposed as if none of it had happened. No bombs fell on Beijing, but the shockwave from Tehran is hitting harder than any missile could, because it revealed something China cannot fix with money, diplomacy, or patience. The oil still flows through Hormuz, and Hormuz still flows through Washington. That equation didn't change this week. It just became impossible to ignore.